I'm Heidi Harris. Welcome. Glad to have you again. As you know, you can find these videos on Rumble, on YouTube, on my website, Heidi Harris Show. I mean, all over the place, right? You can't avoid them. Today, my guest is Mark Meckler. He is the president of the Convention of States Action. Mark, welcome to the Heidi Harris Show. Good to have you.
Hey, I'm really glad to be with you. We were chatting briefly, so everybody knows before we came on the air, this is really important to me. Heidi's a big dog lover. I'm a big dog lover. So whatever happens, I know we're going to have a great conversation.
Well, I think that's true. And I think you win for all the people I've ever talked to. You win for the best set. I mean, it's the best I've ever seen. You got the saddle, you have the dogs, you have the lights, it's all manner of stuff that people do in front of their, window and looking down in their computer, all kinds of crazy stuff. So it looks fabulous. And it's great to have you because you are really just fighting to try to get America back on track. Talk to me about what the Convention of States will do for America.
Sure. Well, it's important people understand where it comes from. It's in the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution has two ways to amend the Constitution. The first and the only one that we've used, where how we've gotten 27 amendments, says that when 2/3 of both houses of Congress want to propose an amendment, they do that. And then it goes out to the states. It has to be ratified by 38 states, 3/4 of the states. The second way, and the one we've never used, says that when 2/3 of the states want to gather in convention to discuss proposing amendments, then they gather. And if you can get a majority of the states to agree on a proposal, that proposal then goes out to the states, just like Congress sends out to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. And so the Article 5 process is designed, the second part of it, to give the states a way to route around the federal government when the federal government is unresponsive. And Lord knows the federal government's been unresponsive to the people for a long time now.
I think a lot of Americans had no idea how bad it was until Elon Musk started revealing this. And so that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, look, and I think even those of us who thought it was really bad, and that's me, I've been paying attention to this for a long time. I thought it was really bad. It's worse than we thought. And part of the reason to call a convention of states right now is because we lived for the last 4 years and we saw during the Biden administration how with a stroke of the pen, they erased almost everything that Donald Trump did. I would say that, probably the main thing they couldn't was the appointments to the courts. But other than that, they wiped out almost all of his agenda within days of taking office. And so we see the president right now doing a whole bunch of stuff that we all really like if we're conservatives. What I want to see is I want that stuff, a lot of it to be permanent. And one of the ways you do it, I'll give you a really specific example. In a convention of states to limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government, you could literally do away with administrative agencies. You could say, for example, that the federal government may not be involved in education. Now, we see the Trump administration, they say they're going to do away with the Department of Education. I'm honestly a little skeptical. And the reason I say that is Reagan said the same thing, one of my great heroes, and it was bigger when he left than when he arrived. But let's say they do away with it. The next time there's a Democrat administration, and let's not be naive, that will happen at some point, they will bring back the Department of Education. It'll be 10 times bigger than it was.
Right, originally. That's the problem. That's what I keep thinking about as Trump's doing this. I keep thinking about what's going to happen with the next president. I hope it's J.D. Vance. It may not be. And then we're back into the ping pong. And I'm wondering how much is actually getting done when people might get fired, but they're not sure they're going to get fired or they might get called back next week. I mean, right now it's just a mess. I'd like to see smaller government, but we just don't know. So you're talking about the idea that a convention of states could get together and put an amendment to the Constitution in that would prevent this, that would allow government to be on a permanent basis smaller and some of these agencies eradicated.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we can do. So there are 3 areas that we're trying to address with this call for a convention of states. 19 out of the necessary 34 states have all made the call already. And so what we're talking about is anything that would impose term limits on federal officials and members of Congress. Notice I said 2 things. It's not just Congress that needs term limits. It's also the staffers and the bureaucrats. I call this now the Fauci Amendment. I never want to see another Anthony Fauci at the helm of any agency again that's been there for 30 or 40 years. They have way too much power. So we need term limits for people like that too. Second is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. We know we need a balanced budget amendment. How do we know we need that? Look, I would just point to this week, and I understand why they did it, but the budget that got passed by the House of Representatives continues to grow the debt. It's still huge and bloated. Again, I'm not criticizing them. I get the political reality.
Go ahead, because they get in there and then everybody has a little something that they want to bring back home to impress the voters to get reelected. We know how this game is played.
Well, and part of it is that they're not incentivized to cut. Like, it is very difficult to make cuts. Every cut has a constituency. But if you were to have a balanced budget amendment in place, they would be forced to make cuts, and they could explain to their constituents, I don't really have a choice. We have to comply with the Constitution. And so I think we need some form of balanced budget amendment, some form of permanent tax caps, spending caps, and we can do these things constitutionally. And then also the last thing is to limit the scope and the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government. This is where we can say things like, you can't be involved in energy or education or healthcare or the environment. These are all areas that were intended for states to be in control. Every state has agencies that regulate all that kind of stuff. It's ridiculous that we have the federal government trying to impose a one-size-fits-all remedy on all of us.
Right, because states know what's best for them, and there are states that are, you look at places like Virginia and North Dakota and places like that where they have an amazing, unique energy requirements and also energy output, and then some bureaucrat who wants green, solar panels or everything everywhere will try to do a one-size-fits-all for the entire country, and that not only strangles the economy of various states, it's not beneficial to America.
No, and I want to add something to that, which is just a sort of an overall political context. One of the things people are concerned about, and rightly so, is that our country is incredibly divided right now, right? It's 50-49, on every issue, 1% maybe undivided or undecided. We need to fix that. We can't go on like that forever where we're at each other's throats. Part of the reason we're at each other's throats is because everything gets decided in DC. Every fight is a national fight. And where you imagine if a bunch of these powers went back to the states, California could be California and Texas could be Texas. We don't have to go to war over it. If California wants all these environmental mandates and solar panels and windmills and all, let them do it. And if Texas doesn't want to do it, let us not do it. And then we can decide the few things that we were supposed to decide on a national basis can be decided in Washington, D.C.
Right. Well, California would be Haiti if it weren't for the federal government. That's another story for another day. And then Americans could decide where they wanted to live.
Yeah, look, and those in Washington, D.C. believe that everything should be centralized in D.C. That's what the politicians always do. The underlying premise for every action taken in D.C., at least prior to this administration, is that D.C. can and should decide for us.
Right.
And most Americans, regardless of their political persuasion, they don't believe that. If you ask them who should decide, most Americans will say, I should decide for myself. Maybe we decide in my family, in my community. Last resort, maybe at the state level, but they don't want people in Washington, D.C., thousands of miles away deciding for them. So this is a way to take that power away from Washington, D.C. and bring it back to the people. It's not partisan because California would get more power and Texas would get more power. By the way, I'm one of those people that left California and moved to Texas, but the more power that D.C. gets, the less Texas is like Texas and the more it gets forced to be like California.
Right. And when you think about things that happened during COVID, I mean, there were mandates put in place in Washington, D.C. that even the people who work on Capitol Hill didn't have to follow, shots and all these other things that the government was forcing on you on a national level. That should not be happening.
Yeah. And to be clear, that could be an amendment where we could put something in the Constitution that says no law passed by Congress can be applied to people of the states if it's not applied to Congress. They exempt themselves from laws all the time, and it shouldn't be that way. Congress, we see all these congressmen getting rich. They're doing insider trading. Insider trading is illegal, and it should be illegal for everybody. But right now, Congress gets away with it.
Yeah, how do these people become millionaires? I mean, it's sickening how much money they have. All right, so what are some of the amendments you'd like to see put in place if the Article 5 convention was held?
Yeah, and to be really clear, we as an organization don't push for particular amendments because we know that convention is going to be a deliberative body. We do have these 3 subject matter areas, so I'll run through a few in each area. First is when we're talking about term limits, it's important to remember, while 85% of Americans want term limits for Congress, most people have never considered the idea of term limits for staffers and bureaucrats. And if we don't do that, if you put term limits on Congress, but not the staffers and bureaucrats, you grow the power of the deep state. And so I want to make sure we don't do that. I also think we need term limits for the federal judiciary. Every study shows the longer a federal judge sits on the bench, the more they rule in favor of big government. And so what we want to do is put term limits on them. Don't feel bad for them. They'll go out and be very wealthy lawyers at some big firm after they've been on the federal bench for a while. So that's the term limits one. Second is anything that would limit or restrain the fiscal house of Washington, D.C. So that's some form of balanced budget amendment. Revenues and expenditures have to meet in some way. But I would say in order to protect the country from overtaxation, you need to say you can't do it through taxation. You need a limitation on the percentage of GDP that you could tax or something like that, that limits the amount that they can tax so that the balanced budget doesn't punish people. It benefits the country. You could put spending caps on. Here's one that most people don't think about that I think is really important. And that is we need to make sure that the federal government uses normal accounting standards. Now, this seems weird. Everybody else in the world is required to account to what's called GAAP. That stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. If you run, say, a publicly traded company and you don't account by GAAP principles, you go to jail. It's literally you get thrown in prison. The federal government doesn't have those principles. I had people at the Office of Management and Budget tell me, asked them, well, what principles do you use? And they said, we don't have any principles.
The eraser?
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's whatever they want. This is off budget. This is on budget. We're not going to account for long term. So we need to impose GAAP on them. And then I think the most important area is there would be amendments that say what the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government is. And we can remove pieces of the federal government from the federal government's purview. Like I said, we could say you can't be involved in education. By the way, the majority of the American public, left and right, Democrat and Republican, don't like the Department of Education. They want education to come from their state or their locality, and we can do that. Another one I think has just been an absolute disaster for the United States has been the Department of Energy. Why is the federal government involved? You mentioned Virginia, you mentioned North Dakota. I'd throw Texas in there as a Texan. Why is the federal government involved in our energy policy in our states? What we can drill, where we can drill, how we can drill, what we can dig out of the ground. That should be none of the business of the federal government. And so we can remove things from the federal government's purview by limiting their scope, their power, and their jurisdiction. One last one I'll throw out there, because I think this is a really easy one. We could limit the Supreme Court to 9 justices. Most people don't realize that's not in the Constitution. There have been times when presidents have threatened to pack the court. We've heard that pretty recently, but it was done during the time of FDR as well. And the left has said, look, if we get power again, if we get the Senate and the House and the presidency, we're going to remove the filibuster in the Senate. We're going to pack the court. And then we're involved in a never-ending spiral. Whoever gets hold of the court will pack the court. More importantly, I think this is one of the most important things I'm going to say all day, Heidi, is if the left gets control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they will pack the court. And when they pack the court, they'll do away with the Second Amendment by interpreting that it only applies to militias. They'll limit our First Amendment freedoms so that they can censor our speech, take away our freedom of religion. That, in my opinion, is the single greatest risk to the republic right now.
I think so. And, we don't realize how fragile our rights are, do we? I mean, sometimes there'll be threats. And now that Trump's gotten back in office, the conservatives are kind of taking a sigh of relief. Oh, great. But we have to be vigilant because they're so easily taken away from us, as you point out. That, of course, the people who want to pass these laws don't care about people who live in high crime neighborhoods, who don't have a lot of money, who need that gun to protect themselves. They're the people most victimized, not the people living behind walls. But once again, they never think about that.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting dichotomy, left, right. I've been doing politics professionally now 15 years. I used to have a lot of friends on the left. I didn't come from the left, but we used to actually be able to converse with each other. And one of the things that I found that was so amazing is how little the left is connected to the reality of what their policies do. And you just mentioned one of my favorites. Look, the people right now in this country who need firearms more than anybody else are people who live in the inner cities.
That's right.
And it's been made difficult, if not impossible, for them to get them. There have been licensing schemes that make it impossible, that make it too expensive. And this is one of the reasons I'm a huge advocate of constitutional carry. Go get a firearm, put it on your hip, carry it around, and protect yourself. And so you say to somebody on the left, don't you want people in inner cities to protect themselves? And they don't understand what you mean. I say that for women, firearms are the actual great equalizer.
Right.
A big man, small woman, you're not going to fight him off. I don't care what kind of martial arts you learn. You're not going to fight him off. But if you have a firearm, you've leveled the playing field. So I'm for women. I'm for poor people who live in the inner city being able to defend themselves. That's a conservative position. It should be everybody's position.
You have to wonder what their thought process is, like banning the books. Nobody said you can't get your kid these books. Go on Amazon, get your kid whatever you want. We're just saying that it's a library for elementary kids, and they shouldn't be exposed to things that, you know, video games or anything else. You have to be 18 to see. I mean, that's all but they go, oh, you're banning books. My child needs access. No, you can buy your kid anything you want. It's the thought process is odd to me.
Yeah, I'll give you another great example. So back when I was living in California, I had a bunch of friends in the San Francisco Bay Area, Marin, very liberal places. And I was sitting with one of them one time, and they were espousing all these wild environmentalist policies, you know, what Rush used to call wacko environmentalists.
Environmental wackos, yep.
Yeah. And I said to this woman who was a dear friend at the time, I said, and she lived in a very fancy house in the Berkeley Hills, and we were sitting in her living room. And I asked her, you know, just nothing personal, but do you have a Hispanic housekeeper? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, and I assume you appreciate her and like her. And she said, yeah, of course. She's been here for many years. And I said, you understand that this was during the Obama administration, that your EPA chief has said gas should be $8 a gallon. And she said, well, yeah, you know, we want people to not drive so much. And I said, well, I understand that doesn't affect you and me, you know, middle-class white people so much. She was really upper class. And I said, what about your housekeeper? Like if gas goes from $3 a gallon to $8 a gallon, how is she going to get to your house? Like she's going to be making choices. Do I buy groceries? Do I buy a coat for my kid, or to put gas in my car so I can work? I said, so all the policies that you propose to protect the environment punish the poor the most. And you don't even think about that. And she literally just sat there and stared at me. Like she had literally never thought about this before. It made her feel good to be an environmentalist, but she hadn't thought about what the actual effect of those policies are. What I'm talking about is reality. So you'll have people say, hey, look, you know, all this stuff should be done in Washington. They're going to fix it in Washington. That's a fantasy. And even, I want to say this, even for my friends on the right today, I love what President Trump's doing. I'm really glad for a lot of the stuff he's doing. Is he going to fix our nation permanently? The answer is no, absolutely no, undeniably, no way, no how, under any circumstances. That's reality. That's not a criticism of President Trump. Our system was not designed to be fixed by a ruling monarch.
And aren't we glad that Obama couldn't do all the things he wanted to? I mean, that was the genius of our founding fathers.
And our framers told us that if the federal government gets out of control and is non-responsive to people, that we should fix it. And that's why they gave us the second clause of Article 5. It actually says in Madison's notes that the way we got this was 2 days before the end of convention. Colonel George Mason stood up to address the people assembled. And he said, look, I know it seems like we're done with this document, but we have a major problem. We gave the power to Congress to propose amendments. And he asked, are we so naive that we believe that a government that becomes a tyranny would propose amendments to restrain their own tyranny? Now, we don't know exactly what happened in the room at that moment. I think they laughed. I think it was a forehead slap moment if they slapped their foreheads back then, because they all knew tyranny, and they all knew that no tyrant, no government that got outside its bounds would ever give up power voluntarily. And so he said, we've got to have this clause that gives the states and the people acting through the states the power to restrain the federal government. That's how we get Article 5, the second clause. And in fact, what Madison's notes say at that point is nin com, which is the Latin abbreviation for no comment. In other words, not one other person objected. They fought about everything, but they didn't object to this idea that if the federal government got out of control, we would need a tool to restrain them. There's no debate, and it's unanimously put in the Constitution to give us this power, which to me makes it even more incredible that after almost 250 years, we haven't used it.
Right. But here's one of the most important things that you just said. They had a frame of reference for what tyranny looked like. We've gotten so soft and we've had it so good for so long that we really don't understand how tyranny could, I mean, they talk about Trump being a tyrant or this and that. We have no idea what they knew, their frame of reference, their recent history in their minds of what this could turn into. And that's why they put it in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So I also hear people, and I want people to, I want to address this problem in advance, or this criticism in advance. I hear people say that if we gather in convention, what will happen is the delegates will get out of control, quote unquote. You'll have a runaway convention, quote unquote. They'll propose things that just destroy our country, and then we won't have a constitution anymore. I hear this every day. Right. I want to be really clear. I was just in Nebraska. I hear it from the leftists, like literally Common Cause, George Soros's organization, lobbied against us, sat at the table in that hearing, said exactly what I just said. But I also hear this, Heidi, from people on the right. And so that's really what I want to address. And this comes primarily from 3 groups in America. So I want to name them because I always want to be upfront. It comes from the John Birch Society. It comes from a group called Eagle Forum. And it comes from a group called Concerned Women for America. Okay. I want to make a distinction between those groups. All right. The John Birch Society, these folks are crazy. And they say a lot of crazy stuff. And they're vicious and slanderous. And it's just out of control. They can't deal with the issues. They attack me personally. They attack my wife. They say all kinds of stuff that's untrue. That's the John Birch Society. By the way, they've been around since the 1950s. The country's gotten a lot worse. So I would suggest maybe we shouldn't listen to them. They haven't accomplished anything. Then you have Eagle Forum and Concerned Women. And I'm going to kind of lump them together a little bit as 2 very patriotic groups who I actually admire a lot. Eagle Forum was founded by a woman by the name of Phyllis Schlafly. That's right. One of the greatest fighters for freedom and especially for the right to life, maybe the first real warrior for the right to life.
It was wonderful. And against feminism too. She was great. She was a
incredible woman, constitutional lawyer, brilliant. Love Phyllis. Heading up Concerned Women for America, Penny Nance, another woman who I think is carrying on that fight, a great warrior on the right. So why would they be opposed to this? And I can tell you like I actually know. I can get inside their heads and I can tell you where it came from. And the reason I know this is because Phyllis Schlafly is the one who said it's going to be a runaway convention. Why did she say that? Well, weirdly, she had become friends with Chief Justice Warren Burger. Okay. And she did that because they were both on the Bicentennial Commission for the Constitution together. Burger, you might recall, was the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade. Odd friends, right? You've got this leftist activist judge who is the Chief Justice. You've got this incredible constitutionalist, anti-feminist fighter for the right to life, Phyllis Schlafly. But I like that they became friends. I think we should be able to have friends across the lines. But we also have to be cautious about what kind of information we get from somebody on the left.
Right.
So there was a movement in the country at that time to call a convention of states under Article 5 to overturn Roe versus Wade. Seems like a really good idea. Unfortunately, Phyllis asked Chief Justice Burger in a letter, you can read the letter yourself, it's online, what he thought about this idea of a convention. What's he going to say? It's a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade, the seminal decision of his career. He's not going to say, hey, Phyllis, I love that. It's a great idea. Instead, he invents this idea of a runaway convention, never been talked about in American history. Says, oh, we got to be careful. We're going to have a runaway convention. We're going to lose our beloved Constitution. And she turns against the idea.
He just took his word for it without, I mean, she trusted him so much that she believed what he had to say, not understanding that it would be a threat to his power, not only that particular case, but his power.
Absolutely. And so that's a kind of a mind virus that infected some folks on the right. There's an article that was written about this a few years back. It's on our website. It's by David Horowitz, the great chronicler of the American left. And Horowitz said, this is left-wing propaganda. It's been used to infect the right against a convention of states. He said, I've been studying this for years. It's a classic technique. By the way, Burger then goes out and gets lawyers from Harvard and Yale to write articles against the idea of a convention of states. And this is why when I go testify in the legislatures, and it's so weird, it's all the Soros orgs aligned against me. It's Common Cause, La Raza, Planned Parenthood, MoveOn.org. You can actually see this on Common Cause's website, 250 left-wing groups. Every communist, baby-hating, America-hating org in America signed this press release against what we're doing. They have dozens of pages against us. They write articles against us all the time. It's them and Eagle Forum and Concerned Women and John Birch Society. It doesn't make any sense to me.
That doesn't make any sense at all. And by the way, I'm going to put your testimony in North Dakota. I'll put that online along with other information about your website, because I knew you explained this very clearly. And you talked about the things that have been said about you. And you're like, hey, let me just straighten out the record here while you're here, because they will slander you. But it's so interesting because you can be infected by hanging out with the wrong people. Bible says that bad friends corrupt good morals. And I'm sure it's politically possible too.
Yeah. So, and again, I want to be clear. I love Eagle Forum and I love what Phyllis Schlafly's legacy is. And I think Penny Nance is a great woman. I think they've been misled. And at this point, they take it as a matter of faith. It's the weirdest thing. Look, if somebody told me, Heidi, on any issue, if you said to me right now, well, Mark, on that issue, do you know when you're on the same side as George Soros, Common Cause, La Raza, MoveOn.org, and Planned Parenthood? My response, I'd be horrified.
Yeah, you'd have to wonder why. You'd say, wait a minute. What do they know that I am not aware of? There's got to be something here.
Exactly. And yet, when I talk to these people, and I talk to them face to face all over the country, And I say exactly that. Well, you're on the same side as all these people. Does that bother you? Their unflinching answer is no. It doesn't bother me at all. And I think,
wow,
I don't know how to have a discussion with, that's not rational. And as conservatives, what we should always be is rational. We should always be willing to engage in the discussion. When somebody presents us with evidence like that, we should think.
You have to think principle. You have to think principle. And a lot of people don't. They completely live by their emotions. They don't ever really think it through, and they should. And you have to wonder when everybody's lining up against something. Wait a minute here. Let me take a step back and figure out where my positions are. And
let me add the other side. So I named all these groups that are against us, and there's over 250 of them, so we can't name the whole list. But if you want to know who's for us, like, just look at the administration right now. JD Vance is an out-and-out supporter. Vivek Ramaswamy, who didn't end up in the administration, is a supporter. And
Alan West, who I love. Alan West. And also Stavros Anthony, our lieutenant governor, who everybody in Nevada loves.
That was a very recent endorsement, which I'm so thrilled about.
I love him. Everybody does.
Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, is
I love her. She's a firecracker, isn't she? My gosh.
Pete Hegseth, who's a longtime friend of mine, is an endorser. Mike Huckabee, who's going to be the ambassador to Israel. Brooke Rollins, who was just named the ag secretary. So it's like the whole panoply inside Trump's cabinet are all endorsers of Convention of States. So you look at all that. You look at a guy, Mark Levin's an endorser, Sean Hannity's an endorser, Ben Shapiro's an endorser. You look at all of these people. You say all these people are on the side of Convention of States. All these leftists are against it. I don't even need to know what the issue is. I'm on the side with all the right-wing guys.
Right. Convince me if you want me to go on the other side. Yeah, it makes no sense to me. I'm going to put all the information up. The website is conventionofstates.com. I'll put all this in the description so people can get involved. And it's not, I mean, to me, it makes sense to at least have the conversation, at least do this and see what you come up with, right? I mean, I don't know what people are so afraid of other than change. We've certainly seen that in the last few weeks with Trump, right? You start talking about change and everyone's freaking out.
Yeah, I like it. And look, there's literally no risk. It takes 38 states to ratify anything that would come out of convention. Look, I'm going to throw out an offer to your viewers, which I've done to millions of people, which is my personal email address is mmeckler@cosaction.com. If you're afraid of this, if you're a skeptic, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Tell me what amendment you're afraid of, and then list the 38 states that would ratify that. And by the way, I made that offer to millions. I've never received an email.
Interesting. Well, I'll put that in the description too, because that's important for people that'll get a hold of you. You'll answer their questions. You have no problem doing it. Once again, I'll put your testimony too, where you recently testified in North Dakota. I'll put all that up there. And I love this little story. Who is Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States Action? I'll put that up there too.
Okay.
Some of the stuff, but it's great talking to you, Mark, and good luck to you. And I'm grateful that you're fighting the good fight.
Hey, Heidi, I appreciate your time, and same to you. Good luck there in Nevada.
Fun talking to him, huh? Great guy. Well, listen. Get yourself involved and putting all the information up here. Conventionofstates.com is the website. Please check it out and educate yourself on it. I'll put all the information up there. Take a look at it. I don't see what's the harm. I really don't. What's everyone afraid of? We need to have more conversations, not fewer conversations. All right. If you want to follow me, Heidi Harris Show, Facebook, right there. That's the website, HeidiHarrisShow.com. Facebook, Twitter, Rumble, YouTube, Heidi Harris Show. I put all my stuff up there. I do a podcast a couple of times a week, Heidi Harris Show podcast. Find that at Spotify, Apple, any of those places. So please check all of that out. And I will be seeing you guys again very soon.